Before we enter the smoke, the storm, and the fire, take 1 second to leave a like and write in the comments which doomed army or forgotten disaster you want us to cover next. Because tonight, we are not just following ships across the sea. We are watching the moment a superpower discovered that even the greatest empire on Earth could be broken by fear, weather, and one night of fire. In the summer of 1588, the English coast waited in dread. On the horizon, across the gray water of the Channel, came a fleet so vast that men described it as a moving forest of masts. Spain had sent its pride, its prayers, its cannons, its soldiers, and its holy confidence into the northern sea. The Spanish Armada was not built to frighten England. It was built to end England. King Philip of Spain believed he was acting with the weight of heaven behind him. His empire stretched across Europe, across the Atlantic, into the silver mines of the New World, across ports, islands, fortresses, and oceans. Spain was rich, disciplined, feared, and armored by faith. England, by comparison, looked small, unstable, and vulnerable. It was ruled by Elizabeth, a Protestant queen whom Catholic Europe viewed as illegitimate, dangerous, and defiant. For years, England had humiliated Spain at sea. English privateers had hunted Spanish treasure ships. Francis Drake had burned Spanish vessels in port. English money and weapons had supported rebels in the Netherlands against Spanish rule. To Philip, England was no longer a minor irritation. It was a wound in the side of Catholic Europe, a pirate nest protected by fog, politics, and luck. The plan was simple enough to sound unstoppable. The Armada would sail from Spain into the English Channel. It would control the sea long enough to link with the Duke of Parma, whose veteran army waited in the Spanish Netherlands. Then Parma's troops would cross the narrow water, land on English soil, march toward London, and crush Elizabeth's throne. If the plan worked, England could be forced back into the Catholic world. Protestant power in Europe could be shattered, and Spain would stand even higher as the dominant force of the age. But the plan carried a hidden weakness. It depended on perfect timing. It depended on wind, tides, communication, discipline, and coordination across dangerous water. It depended on a fleet meeting an army that was not actually ready to cross. It depended on commanders obeying orders written far away by men who could not smell the weather, see the coast, or hear the panic of sailors in the dark. At the head of the Armada was the Duke of Medina Sidonia. He was noble, loyal, and brave in his own way. But he was not the legendary sea commander Spain needed. He had warned that the expedition was dangerous. He had concerns about supplies, crews, ships, and the sheer difficulty of the mission. He even asked not to command it. Philip refused. The king trusted rank, duty, and divine favor more than doubt. So the Armada sailed. It was a magnificent sight, and also a nightmare waiting to happen. Around 130 ships moved north, carrying sailors, soldiers, priests, horses, artillery, powder, food, water, and the heavy expectations of an empire. The fleet was arranged in a crescent formation, a defensive shape meant to protect weaker vessels and prevent the English from breaking through. From a distance, it looked almost invincible, a floating wall of wood and iron crossing the sea beneath the banners of Spain. But inside that wall, life was brutal. Men slept in cramped, filthy conditions. Food spoiled. Water turned foul. Disease crawled through the decks. The smell of sweat, salt, rot, and powder filled the air. Many ships were not built for the kind of long, flexible naval war they were about to face. Spain expected battle to become close combat. The Spanish wanted to grapple enemy ships, board them, and let trained infantry decide the fight with blade, pike, musket, and courage. England had a different idea. The English fleet was smaller, but faster and more maneuverable. Its commanders understood that if they let Spanish soldiers board their ships, the fight could become a massacre. So they refused the old way of war. They would not rush into the arms of the Armada. They would not let Spanish infantry turn the channel into a floating battlefield of hand-to-hand slaughter. Instead, they would strike from distance. Cannon would become their weapon. Speed would become their shield. When the Armada was sighted, warning beacons flared across England. Hill after hill caught fire. The news spread in flame. Spain was coming. Villages stared toward the coast. Men gathered weapons. Families prayed. In London, fear moved through the streets like sickness. Everyone understood what was at stake. If Parma's army landed, England might not survive. The first clashes were terrifying, but indecisive. English ships harassed the Armada, firing from range, then slipping away before the Spanish could close. Cannon smoke drifted over the water. Iron shots smashed into hulls, tore through rigging, and sent splinters flying like knives. Men screamed below decks where the wounds of naval warfare were hidden from glory. But the Armada held together. That was what frightened the English most. The Spanish formation bent, suffered, absorbed punishment, and kept moving. Day after day, the great fleet continued eastward through the Channel. The English wounded it, but they could not yet break it. The crescent remained. The invasion still lived. Every mile brought Spain closer to Parma. Every hour increased the danger that England would face not just ships, but soldiers on its own beaches. Then the Armada anchored near Calais. This was supposed to be the moment of union. The fleet would meet Parma. The army would cross. England would face the final crisis. But instead of order, the Spanish found delay and confusion. Parma's forces were not ready to simply march aboard waiting transports and sail. Dutch ships and shallow waters complicated everything. Communication was slow. The Armada could not easily reach Parma. Parma could not easily reach the Armada. The grand machine of empire had arrived at the decisive point and discovered that one of its gears was missing. That night, the English saw their chance. They took old vessels and turned them into weapons of terror. The ships were packed with pitch, tar, brushwood, powder, and anything that would burn with savage hunger. Then they were set alight and sent drifting toward the anchored Spanish fleet. Imagine standing on a Spanish deck in the darkness. The sea is black. The air is tense. Men whisper prayers. Then, out of the night, flaming ships appear. Their sails burn like red wings. Their masts spit sparks into the sky. Their hulls glow with heat. They drift closer and closer, silent except for the roar of fire and the cracking of timber. To the Spanish, these were not just burning ships. They were memories of horror. Explosive fire ships had been used before in European wars, and the fear of them was deep. A single floating bomb could tear ships apart. Panic spread faster than flame. Orders broke. Discipline cracked. Captains cut anchor cables to escape. Ships lurched into the dark, colliding, scattering, fleeing from the fire. The crescent formation, the great symbol of Spanish strength, dissolved. By dawn, the Armada was no longer a single armored body. It was a wounded giant, scattered and exposed off Gravelines. The English attacked with fury. Their ships came close enough to deliver devastating cannon fire, but still avoided the deadly embrace of boarding combat. Shot after shot struck Spanish hulls. Wood exploded. Guns tore loose. Men were crushed, burned, mutilated, and thrown into the chaos of battle. Some Spanish ships fought with extraordinary courage. Medina Sidonia's flagship endured punishment and survived. But courage could not repair the broken plan. At Gravelines, England did not destroy every Spanish ship. It did something more important. It destroyed the invasion. The Armada was driven away from Parma. The sea route to England was no longer under Spanish control. The chance to escort the army across the Channel was gone. Spanish commanders now faced the brutal truth. They could not complete the mission. They could not turn back safely through the Channel with English ships still threatening them. The only option was to sail north around Scotland and Ireland, then return to Spain through the Atlantic. It sounded like retreat. It became disaster. The fleet that had survived English cannon now entered the cruelty of the Northern Sea. Supplies ran low, water spoiled, men weakened, wounds festered, disease spread through crowded decks. The ships, many already damaged, were pushed into unfamiliar and violent waters. Then the storms came. The Atlantic did not care about kings, prayers, banners, or empires. Wind smashed into the Armada with merciless force. Waves rose like moving cliffs. Ships lost masts, anchors, sails, and control. Some were driven onto the rocks of Ireland, where hulls burst apart beneath cliffs, and men were hurled into freezing surf. Survivors crawled onto shore half dead, only to face hunger, capture, or execution. The sea finished what cannon had begun. When the remnants of the Armada finally returned to Spain, the Great Fleet was a shadow of itself. Thousands were dead from battle, disease, starvation, drowning, and wreck. Families waited in ports for men who would never come home. Survivors carried stories of fire ships in the night, cannon thunder at Gravelines, storms beyond human endurance, and corpses washed against foreign rocks. Spain was not destroyed. Its empire remained vast. Its armies remained dangerous. Its wealth still crossed oceans. But the myth of invincibility had cracked. The world had seen that a superpower could fail, not because it lacked courage, not because its soldiers refused to fight, but because ambition had outrun reality, because planning had ignored distance, because commanders had trusted formation more than flexibility, because one night of fear broke discipline, because weather, that oldest enemy of empire, turned retreat into ruin. For England, survival became legend. The Armada's failure became a story of providence, courage, and national destiny. Elizabeth's kingdom had stood against the greatest fleet on earth and lived. The victory did not instantly make England master of the seas, but it changed the imagination of a nation. It gave English sailors confidence. It fed future ambition. It helped open the long, violent road toward Atlantic empire. Yet beneath the legend, the story remains deeply human. It is the story of sailors trapped between kings and storms, soldiers packed into wooden walls, waiting for a landing that never came, commanders forced to make impossible choices in smoke and confusion, priests praying over the dying while ships broke beneath them, men who thought they were sailing toward holy victory, only to meet fire, panic, and the cold mouth of the sea. The Spanish Armada's great disaster reminds us that power is never as permanent as it appears. A fleet may darken the horizon. An empire may cover maps. A king may believe history itself has chosen him. But the world is larger than ambition. The wind shifts, the tide turns, fire drifts closer in the night, and suddenly the future belongs to those who survive.